The Engaged Company Culture podcast is all about how you, as a leader, whether you have the title or don't, can help engage your company culture in a way that people are excited to be at work, yourself included. Listen to this podcast or view the video in order to gain resources, tips and tricks, and stories of how companies have reached higher levels of engagement and how you can do it too. Remember to like, review, rate, subscribe, and most of all, share this podcast with other people you think will benefit. Enjoy today's episode. On today's episode, I get to speak with retired Lieutenant Colonel Kathy Gallowitz. She fascinates me for many reasons. First of all, Lieutenant Colonel Gallowitz grew up as a Navy brat. She then served nearly 30 years as an Air Force officer, and her husband is in the Army. Not only that, but she has a son who served in the Army National Guard for a little while. She is the founder and CEO of Vanguard Veteran LLC, the author of Beyond Thank You for Your Service, the Veteran Champion Handbook, which, by the way, I love and recommend. It is written for civilians, and she has her master's degrees, 2 of them, one in nursing and one in political science. As an award-winning businesswoman with firsthand experience hiring veterans, Kathy coaches employers to excel with hiring and retaining and engaging veteran talent in ways that strengthen their workforce. Her Veteran Talent Academy equips employers to find, hire, and leverage veteran skill sets. I'm sure you're seeing why I was excited to have her on the show. Kathy also equips volunteer faith community leaders to build military ministries to cultivate mutual support, a sense of belonging, and spiritual resiliency for military connected people. My husband is an Army chaplain, so that piece that she does speaks to my soul as well. She focuses on helping civilians become veteran champions. That includes business leaders. Kathy, thank you for agreeing to be on Engaged Company Culture. Welcome to the show.
Oh, Catherine, thank you. It is my absolute pleasure to be here with you. We have so much in common.
We do, and I love talking to you every opportunity I get. You are a veteran. You are the child of a veteran. You are the spouse of a veteran. How did that lead you to become a civilian, an instructor of civilians to support veterans?
Right on. This work really is my life's calling because of all those experiences, right? I don't do this for pay. I do this for passion.
I love it.
And primarily because when I was the director of community outreach for the Ohio National Guard, in response to 9/11, we built a statewide outreach program to educate and engage civilians in support of troops and their families. Through that role, Catherine, I saw how much satisfaction, if not really joy, citizens get when they fully understand, okay, now I see what I can do. Okay, now I see how I can do it. And when they have someone come alongside them, encourage them, inspire them, recognize them, reinforce the knowledge, and, maybe offer encouragement or next steps, it is so rewarding for them and for the person who comes alongside them. In that case, it was me. And those are some of the people I feature in my book, offering really just lots of practical how-to strategies as to how civilians from most walks of life can do more to support those who sacrifice so much for us, not only the veteran, but the service member and their family. I call all those people military connected people.
I love that phrase, military connected, because there are people who are, as you said, not in the military themselves, but you have the family, and even outside of that, the friends who are truly invested are still military connected. And then the organizations that are hiring veterans or who are looking for veterans become military connected. And I also love that you said joy. These individuals who have found a way to be military connected without being a military service member experience joy in their contribution.
Let me tell you a quick story, please. So
Yes.
I live in Phoenix, and I was having lunch with a business colleague, and she was explaining to me, she was an HR professional, how a decade earlier, she had invested in and started a veteran hiring initiative within her company.
Ooh.
And she said to me, frankly, Kathy, I get goosebumps when I talk about it. Now, Catherine, if that's not an indication of joy, I mean, 10 years later, talking about how meaningful it was to her to really improve the quality of life of our veterans, but by so doing, strengthening and improving her workforce. And I contend that a civilian veteran champion does not only improve the quality of life of a veteran, but strengthens the workforce if they are your employee. And by inviting them, by making it possible for that employee to live in a community, that the community also wins, because there's research out there. The 2015 American Enterprise Institute study titled "Veterans Are Broke No More, Veterans Are Civic Assets." Civic assets. They looked at like 11 different criteria and found that of those criteria, the veterans contributed more than their non-veteran counterparts. They looked at things like, no surprise, volunteering, okay, at church, baseball coach, basketball coaches, okay, volunteering, donating to charity, doing good things for your neighbors. And no surprise here, but voting regularly. I mean, there were a lot of other attributes that were looked at, but those are the key ones that I remember. So by being a civilian veteran champion, you do all those things, improve the life of our veterans, and I believe also improve your life, enrich your life by understanding, supporting, befriending those who do so much for us. I think it's a win-win there, but it's certainly also a win-win in the workforce and in the community.
Absolutely. I was going to have you define, and people can find this in your book, Beyond Thank You for Your Service, and you expounded a little bit, but define a veteran champion, please.
Great question. Yes, I define it as someone who creates mutually beneficial activities and services. Key is mutual, right?
Yes.
Mutual, reciprocal. I mean, not in every way, but certainly there's benefit on both sides, right? Mutually beneficial activities and services that improve quality of life, workforce, and community. And that's a win-win for the civilian as well as the military connected person.
Absolutely. Oh, thank you so very much. Now, I've spoken with veterans who have had trouble translating their skills into civilian speak, and I've spoken with employers who have trouble understanding what a veteran can do. How do you overcome this? How do you help them to understand how diverse and how much of an asset a veteran can be?
Well, I think the first thing is understanding that it's a dual responsibility, right? The responsibility first and foremost is with the transitioning service member for them to come up to speed, make sure their resume is not in military speak, but civilian speak, Okay.
Totally.
That takes a little bit of elbow grease, a little bit of work, but there's a lot of free services out there now to help make that happen. And, as I talk to HR professionals, resumes continue to be a challenge, whether you're a veteran or a civilian. It's a tough tool, but the veteran has to own their transition, right? Figure out who they are, what they want, which is in and of itself not necessarily easy, depending on your age and maturity, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
And so know kind of where you want to go, have a decent resume, learn how to self-promote, which again is not easy. We are so focused on team. We really in many cases may not understand what our strengths are because we've been so used to responding to the needs of the military, right?
Exactly.
And so in an interview, you have to share your strengths, share your impact, and it's a different mindset for the military person. So on the employer side, it's really important to understand military culture and invest a little bit of thinking and time and effort in that culture. I just described some of the distinctions of military culture. Military skills translators are really your best friend in this process. There's several out there. I like O''NET. And so what you can do is put in the military job classification and come up with civilian job titles that military job prospect is well suited for. Not only that, but knowledge, skills, and abilities that come along with that military job. There's also descriptions of the military job in the military crosswalk section. It is really kind of the code breaker, if you will. And it's what you need to do to start preparing for your interview. Okay. And then understanding, how to put that candidate at ease, questions to ask and not ask, kinds of question, behavioral and situational. There really is kind of, Catherine, a communication gap between military and civilian people. Another quick story. So oftentimes people who are transitioning from the military, whether they serve 5 years or 25 years, may have not ever had a civilian job interview. Okay. And so the behaviors, the understandings are very different, if you will, than maybe a military interview. It's just a kind of a different process. So I recently attended a retirement ceremony of a F-18 fighter pilot's Navy captain. So he was, a senior military officer. It was just an exceptional opportunity for me and my husband. And, offline, he told me, after 25 years, I've never had a civilian job interview and I needed coaching. And boy, I hope somebody interviews me or somebody hires me. And this guy, had something like 3,000 flying hours, 700 aircraft carrier landings, and he got 2 leadership awards for U.S. Naval Forces, which is a huge, organization. He got it 2 years in a row. So this guy is,
Phenomenal and recognized and valuable.
very accomplished. And if he, after 25 years, has uncertainty about being prepared for an interview, uncertainty about being hired in the commercial air flight, airlines, commercial airlines, which is, kind of apples to apples, I think apples to apples experience. Yes. Although, they're not going to be, doing, fighter pilot maneuvers, but so there's a lot of uncertainty and skills that need to be learned. And and so my goal is to help employers meet our military job prospects, kind of at least halfway, have a general understanding of military culture, be prepared for that interview. And then once you hire them, help them get engaged quickly and learn how to leverage their skill sets.
I think it's brilliant. I love that you brought up the Navy captain with 25 years experience, because when you look at that, now again, I'm an Army spouse and I have an uncle and a cousin who both retired from the Air Force. So to me, a Navy captain is the same as an Army or Air Force colonel, like full bird.
Right.
And so that's the language that I think of. You think of all of the people that Navy captain has influenced, has led, has taught all of the experience that this captain has, and then recognize that that transition to civilian life is intimidating. It's really fascinating. At the same time, recognize, oh my goodness, look at all of this experience and how can we leverage it? And again, every military branch with which I've ever interacted talks about team, talks about leadership is to encourage and to raise up and give direction when necessary, but allow freedom for learning. And bringing that into the civilian world is phenomenal. It gives so many fantastic opportunities.
Well, and before I forget this point, I think I'd like to make it, and that is that, again, whether you've served 5 or 25 years, a key point that our citizenry, our civilians, our civilian veteran champions need to really bear in mind, Catherine, is that we don't have a civilian support network. Okay, so let's look at, if a captain of 25 years is intimidated or uncertain, think how that person with 5 years of service feels after they maybe go back home or go to a new community. Either way, when they come back home, their support systems have all shifted. Their friends have gone on. They come back to a different environment, a different community. They themselves have changed, hopefully all for the good. Right. Which is a great news story, but they're starting from scratch almost, even though they're quote unquote coming home. They have lost 5 years of, getting to know influencers in the community. They may not know, where to go look for jobs. They may not know where to go, just the normal things when you move, the mechanic, the hairdresser, where you want to go to church, all those things, all those social support things are really important for anybody transitioning out of the military, because we don't have a civilian support network. But one of the most important networks is networking for employment. Most jobs come from referrals from other people and being by name endorsed, if you will, in your community. And military people don't have that. So that really puts us behind the power curve. When my first career was nursing, and when I applied for civilian jobs, because I was, part-time military for many years, when I applied for civilian nursing jobs were at the bedside, I could get those pretty easily, right? Because, nursing to nursing is pretty much a apples to apples comparison. But when I started to apply for, more managerial roles, I always lost to the internal candidate. Here I was thinking I've got some great leadership experience. I, I'm very adaptable, and I've had some management experience in the military. And yet, I wasn't able to get those positions because, they, and I appreciate that, oftentimes we want to promote from within, but even when there's apples to apples comparison, it can be challenging to get that person to, if you will, take a risk and fully appreciate some of the things you described that military service teaches us, and to, give that person an opportunity, even though you may not have worked alongside of them, even though, you have a qualified internal candidate. And so I spend a lot of time, educating employers about the value of veteran talent and military culture. But I tell you what, since since the 2010s, 11, 12, something like that, when veteran unemployment was double digit, it's now single digit. The lowest it's been is like 2.1 recently. And so the business community is hiring veterans in record numbers and understands the business case for hiring veterans and how it benefits them. And so we've come a long way in terms of the understanding of veteran talent, but we still have a ways to go with the full engagement and with not having veterans be underemployed.
Absolutely. So what advice would you give to the leaders who want to engage their veterans?
Well, I think it starts once you make that decision to hire someone, it starts immediately before they set foot in the door. And so having a really good onboarding process that's not just pencil whipped, that's terminology we use in the military of, well, it's just an exercise we don't take very meaningfully. But I highly recommend communication before they show up, because my husband, a 25-year active duty soldier with 4 combat tours, I can't tell you, Catherine, how many times he's asked me, well, what do I wear?
Oh,
and guys are kind of like that anyway, but he's got a good point. When for 25 years, all he wore was his uniform. And for 25 years, it was very serious about which uniform you wear when, right?
Absolutely.
And so when you go out socially, it's like, okay, what's appropriate wear? He takes that very seriously. When you go into a new job, when what do I wear? How do I show up? I mean, anybody worries about that, but I think military people in particular worry about that. But then there's so many other changes that are so different from military culture. One of the big ones being is, how do I make decisions? Who do I talk to if I have a question? Okay. Or, how do I potentially pursue advancement? And so I really recommend to foster engagement from day one. You have both a military and a civilian, if you will, sponsor or mentor who takes the role seriously, has sort of an open door policy, and it's a safe place where that transitioning military person can, knock on the door, say, hey, I kind of have a silly question. I don't know where to go with this, because you already feel like a fish out of water. The data says that 55% of Iraq and Afghanistan veterans feel disconnected from mainstream America.
Wow.
And oh, by the way, when 1.5% of America is a female veteran, okay, I suggest to you that women veterans may even feel more disconnected, right? Because I think the recent figure I saw was that 1 out of every 69 women is a female veteran.
Wow.
Wow is right. And so, being particularly sensitive or aware that, oh, okay, female veteran here, don't treat her differently, but, maybe take a little bit of time and effort to, get to know her story. And that's another really important piece of engagement and retention is, for anybody, but because military people's the culture is so different, and because there's, very few of us, I recommend you take time to get to know them as people and, be a good active listener, connect with them, be on the alert for, things that might be troubling them, just like you would with any other coworker. And then get them engaged with, other veterans. If you have a veteran committee or a council, I like to call them for, small to medium-sized businesses, because large corporations, most corporations, I imagine these days, with the increased attention and emphasis on diversity, equity, inclusion, I believe most large corporations probably have a veteran employee resource group and take it very seriously. And that's just a very powerful way to engage and retain, because there's informal mentoring, there's, recognition and collaboration, and hopefully awareness building about military culture. And then another key approach is to turn the members of your veteran employee resource group into your ambassador, your brand ambassadors out in the community, because right, the camaraderie amongst veterans is huge. And if you have a great culture and you're appreciating, valuing, and advancing your military talent, and you have a really great military friendly culture, they're going to talk to their friends, and you're going to have more and more employees come your way that bring all those strengths to the workforce that help make your workforce more productive.
Oh, I think it's fantastic. You mentioned diversity, equity, inclusion. You mentioned brand ambassadors. You mentioned culture. One of the things that really stuck out to me is when you're looking at diversity, equity, and inclusion, one of the things that many of us have recognized is that there are biases that are unconscious biases in many cases. There are myths and there are misconceptions. What types of myths and misconceptions do you still work to overcome as you are getting veterans hired and engaged and retained?
I think probably the top two are first, post-traumatic stress disorder. The data shows that about 20% of Americans have PTSD. Whereas we used to kind of think it was just associated with, people who had experienced combat. It just ain't so. Excuse me. It's just not so. And
Right.
it's so gratifying to know that we're in a time and era in our society that we're taking mental health more and more seriously. Unfortunately, because of the pandemic, but it's always been a gap in our healthcare system to not, really treat mental health as seriously as physical health, right?
Mhm.
And so PTSD is certainly something that affects anyone who's experienced trauma. And when 2/3 of us have experienced trauma and only 1% of our nation's citizenry has served in the military, it's more likely you'll meet a civilian with PTSD than you will a veteran. Now, yes, about 20% of Iraq and Afghanistan veterans and about 30% of Vietnam veterans, this is according to the Department of Veteran Affairs, have PTSD. But either way, that means 80% of Iraq and Afghanistan veterans and 70% of Vietnam veterans do not have it. Now, we hear about it because, some really bad stuff happens sometimes. We hear about it in the media. And if there's any association with the military, that's usually, we hear about that. So
Right.
the good news about PTSD is that people can live great lives managing their triggers, and there is treatment. And the thing that's really exciting is that there's more and more technology apps, that can help the person struggling with it to really manage their triggers even better. And the research and the treatments are getting more and more sophisticated. So I'm very encouraged about that. So anyone who's listening, don't be afraid of that, and offer good benefits. I know the benefits for mental health are increasing, all over the employment sector. So that's a good news story. Do you want me to go on to the next one, or do you have questions?
All I can think is that I would have expected the PTSD rate to be higher. It seems like the majority of veterans that I meet have PTSD, and yet there are so many that don't. And I agree that even in a military connected family, that's a misconception of mine
Good
that
point.
I expected. It's fascinating.
It really is. And I am a messenger here, and that's what the Department of Veterans Affairs reports. And, I think when we are aware of certain things, we see certain things more,
And
right?
that's valid.
And certainly post-traumatic stress disorder is an unfortunate byproduct of any kind of trauma. But the good news is it's treatable, and you can recover. Another quick story. In my book, I feature a gentleman at Equitable Mortgage who is a civilian and has PTSD because he lost 3 friends in a car accident as a youth.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, can you imagine? And so part of the way that he sort of heals his post-traumatic stress disorder is by serving veterans. Because he thanks all the veterans he knows. He participates in honor flight. He raises money, and he just is actively involved in serving others. Which, as most people know, when you serve others, you're not thinking about yourself, and it's a very productive healing modality. And so, I think that's a really sort of poignant story about how post-traumatic stress disorder is can be pretty universal. About 20% of our citizenry has it. So can we move on to communication,
Yes.
to the next sort of myth and
Yes,
misconception?
Yes, please.
In the military, it's pretty hierarchical.
Yes.
And, and it's really at the end of the day a good news story, because we make decisions effectively, we move swiftly, we know how to problem solve. And so when you take off your uniform and enter the civilian workforce, there's not that hierarchy, there's not that rank. And so the communication styles that might be well suited in that hierarchical organization may not be so appropriate in the civilian workforce. So my husband, again, I love to tell stories on him. He used to say, when he was in service, he used to say, when someone wouldn't get to the point, he'd say, "They just use up good Army oxygen." And now, have you heard that before, Catherine?
I have not.
I know. Ed was a logistician and a recruiter, so I don't know if it's maintenance or logistician talk, but. And so now, even so, though, he's been out 7 years or so, and he doesn't use that comment as much, but I can tell when, people are, talking more, they're not getting to the point that, it causes him frustration. The other communication style, sometimes military people can be pretty direct. I mean, the emails we send are bluff. Bottom line up front, right? We don't need to sugarcoat things. We just kind of need to get the message out. And that efficient communication is, of course, really important, especially in, combat related scenarios. But we are task oriented. We are mission oriented. We have a mentality of get her done. Let's get the job done, and get the job done with the team, and give the team credit. So, the communications, things of, let's get to the point, maybe being a little direct, or, some people think all those military people can do is bark orders, or all they can do is follow orders. Well, by golly, those things are really important no matter where you work. I mean, not barking orders, but being able to give direction is important, but how you do it, probably or may need to be polished a little bit. Again, depending upon, the job that the person had. If someone was in personnel, it's probably a little different than being a drill sergeant, or if someone was a nurse, it's probably a little different than being a Navy SEAL, so to speak, right? And so, you meet one veteran, but those are some of the myths and misconceptions that probably follow us. Or the other one is, maybe being too bossy, not being patient enough. And those characteristics are real, but they are well placed in a military environment. And again, as a leader, the situation dictates the response. Now, being harsh and yelling, there's really no place for that. Maybe on the battlefield, but there's really no place for that unless there's a safety concern. So the big takeaway from this point of our discussion is, if you're working with a veteran and you see behaviors that are causing you concern, provide feedback.
Yes.
Most military people are relatively thick-skinned, are used to getting feedback, because that's a very real part of what we do. And, we can handle a little rough and tumble, a little bit of, constructive feedback. So give it to them. Don't be afraid, learn how to do that. Provide that constructive criticism so that veteran will excel, and you will continue to leverage their skill set in ways that strengthens your workforce.
Beautiful. Thank you. I love the way you encapsulated that. Don't be afraid to give feedback. In a military environment, you get the bottom line up front. So go ahead and start with the bottom line when you're talking to a veteran, and be sure that you are explaining, this is what I observed, this is how it works in this organization, and make sure that you can incorporate.
And Catherine, that brought up another really key point is, be clear about what the expectations are. Don't leave. I mean, veterans typically have a serious sense of purpose. They have a seriousness in terms of desire to contribute. And more often than not, they have a desire to succeed, right? And so if they are lost or unclear about how to succeed, that causes a lot of frustration. And in some cases, the veteran may be uncertain about, asking those questions, again, depending on their level of maturity. So, that's a big takeaway as well. Be clear about what you expect from him or her, and provide clear feedback, the positive feedback and the constructive feedback.
Yes. I love that. Remember that feedback is both positive recognition and recommendations for improvement. It's not just one, it is both. I think that's valuable for everybody.
Right on.
Now, we're going to have a bunch of different links for you in the show notes. We're going to have the overview for Vanguard Veteran. We're going to have information on the Veteran Talent Academy, a complimentary Veteran Ready assessment, employer consulting and training that Vanguard Veteran provides, a connection to ONET, a transition resource guide, and also including how to reach out to you as an invitation to speak. We're going to have so much wonderful information in the show notes. If somebody wants to reach out to you specifically, what's the best way for that person to reach you?
Kathy with a K and a Y at vanguardveteran.com. And my website is vanguardveteran.com. Love to hear from you. I offer a complimentary discovery call. I have a Veteran Ready assessment form just to kind of get a look at your company to see what you're doing well and where your opportunities are for improvement. Love to talk to you.
You are amazing. And I love everything that you're doing. From this time that you and I have shared, what is the main thing that you want people to walk away remembering?
That military people have volunteered to serve this great nation, and that they really appreciate you taking time to get to know them as people. They appreciate you going beyond thank you for your service and finding ways that you can support them through through your actions. And know that when you ask them how you can support them, that it's critically important that you follow through, because that's how you build trust with someone who has been in a very trusting environment with lots of camaraderie in a tribe that they absolutely cherish. And so when they leave all that, they miss those trusting relationships, they miss their tribe, and they really need your support reintegrating in the community, at work, at wherever.
Thank you, Kathy. Everybody who has listened or watched, be excited about how you can become military connected as a veteran champion. You will find more joy at work as you help veterans find more joy at work. It will last decades. Thank you for tuning into Engaged Company Culture. Please remember to like, follow, subscribe, and share this episode and the podcast with others it will benefit. Thank you, Kathy, for being here.
Thank you, Catherine. Appreciate you. And thank you for being a military spouse.
Happy to do it.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Engaged Company Culture as much as I enjoyed recording it. Remember, you always can change your company culture or continue your company culture to higher levels of engagement and joy at work. So not only do the people around you enjoy their work, but you look forward to Mondays as well. Please remember to like, subscribe, rate, review, and most of all, share Engaged Company Culture podcast, especially this episode if you received value.